From the uproar over abortion to ongoing efforts to aid Ukraine in its fight for survival against Russia to supply shortages for crucial items here in the U.S. We have no shortage of topics to discuss this morning with Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Senator, thanks for joining us here.
Nice to be with you.
So efforts to codify Roe v. Wade in the Senate came up short, as expected this week. The votes just weren't there. We don't know what's going to happen with the Supreme Court, but we expect it's going to be some kind of overturning of the precedent from 1973. How far it goes, not sure yet. So in that event, what is the long-term goal to try and resolve the problem, as you see it, of trying to bring these rights into law through the Women's Health Protection Act? Is that the vehicle from here on out, and how long is it going to take, do you believe, to make that happen?
Well, like the majority of women in New Hampshire and across this country, I have been outraged by the leaked draft opinion from the Supreme Court that says that they will overturn Roe v. Wade. It's the first time in my lifetime that we've seen freedoms that women counted on taken away. And I think about my daughters and granddaughters and what that might mean in their lives. And I see what's happening in states across this country, including in New Hampshire, where Chris Sununu signed the first law restricting abortion in modern history here. And we can't count on states to do the right thing. So we've got to continue to educate people about what it means for women to be able to control our own bodies, to be able to have the choice about our own reproductive futures. And we need to organize, because everybody who's running for office in November ought to be asked where they stand on Roe. What is their position?
You're not running for office, but you know, one of the questions that's come out of this is that the Women's Health Protection Act goes a little bit farther than Roe v. Wade in terms of the extent of abortion it does protect, and you voted in favor of it. So is it safe to say you support legal elective abortions right up until birth?
What the law did was to codify what was in the Supreme Court decision around Roe, and that says that it's women who should decide, and that the idea that this was abortion on demand or abortion up until the 9th month just wasn't accurate. That's not what the Roe decision says. But people manipulated what was in the law to try and make their own points. The fundamental issue here, though, Adam, is who should make that decision? I don't think somebody on the Supreme Court should make a decision about what is the most personal and private question that women and families make for themselves. That should be made by the women in consultation with their doctors, with their clergy, with their families. It should not be made by Chris Sununu in Concord. It should not be made by Sherm Packard in the legislature. It should not be made by Samuel Alito at the Supreme Court. It should be made by women, and that's the point.
In that third trimester, is there at any point a compelling legal interest to protect that nascent life that is in the womb?
Well, under Roe, that is not allowed unless you're talking about the life of the mother. So that is just...
What about the Women's Health Protection Act, though? That would have allowed it right up...
No, that's just wrong, Adam. It would have allowed what Roe allows, which is up to viability. And so I think, again, that's an effort to manipulate the issue for those people who don't want to talk about who makes the decision. And that's the point. The point is it's women who should make this decision. And this is, the freedom to control our own bodies is something that is just fundamental. And what the Supreme Court, what the legislature in New Hampshire, what 26 states that are poised to have laws that are going to go into effect if Roe is overturned, what they want to do is they want to take away those freedoms from women.
So in your personal view, is there any reasonable restriction that can be placed on abortion by the government?
Roe places a restriction, and that is viability. So this is not about, again, it's not about who places those restrictions. It's about who makes the decision. And I think that decision should be made by women. It should be made by women and their families. It should not be made by some extreme politician somewhere who has no idea what the woman's circumstances are.
In your full delegation press conference this last week, the decision of Griswold v. Connecticut was brought up, and the specter of the possibility that that could be somehow overturned by the most extensive version of overturning Roe v. Wade, that these dominoes would start to fall. Do you actually believe that Republicans in certain states around the country would try to restrict access to contraceptives?
I think they're already trying to do that. And in fact, we've seen that on the international stage, where the global gag or Mexico City policy has said that any entity that talks about abortion should not have any help from the United States. Now, fortunately, the Biden administration reversed that policy, but what the Trump administration did was expand that in ways that covered contraceptive and family planning, the reduction in support for the United Nations Family Planning Organization. And what's so ironic about this, Adam, is that if you don't believe in abortion, you want people to have access to family planning information, because what we know is that that reduces the number of unplanned pregnancies.
I want to get your reaction to some remarks that were made by Governor Chris Sununu this last week on a conservative podcast. Over the last couple of weeks, he's been reiterating that he's a pro-choice governor. This is a pro-choice state, and abortion will be protected here in New Hampshire in the first 2 trimesters. But on this podcast, he said, quote, "I'm the first governor in 40 years to sign an abortion ban. Republican governors before me never signed that. I've done more on the pro-life issue, if you will, than anyone." What does that sound like to you?
It sounds like he's trying to have it both ways. And for those of us who were watching Chris Sununu, we knew that he was not interested in protecting women's reproductive futures. And that says it very clearly, that he told us what his true colors are.
Republicans contend that Democrats are pressing so hard on this issue because they want to turn the page and talk about anything other than the economy. What's your response to that?
I'm talking about it because it's an issue that I'm hearing from women and people across New Hampshire and across this country. We've had 3 times as many people communicate with us who are opposed to the Supreme Court overturning Roe as those who support it. We need to talk about what's on people's minds, and this is what's on people's minds. Now, we also need to talk about the economy, because there's a lot we need to do to address the challenges that families are facing when it comes to their own pocketbooks. But this is an issue that women are facing. As I said, it's the first time in my lifetime that, and I think probably in the last century, when the freedoms that women have had are going to be taken away.
Speaking of women and children, the infant formula shortage is something that's affecting a lot of families right now. Talking to other, dads and moms who have young children, they're looking around and they can't find it. And the Biden administration is trying to get around on this. But what is the plan to try and bring back a supply that's crucial for these parents? Well,
it is, and I certainly understand why parents are so concerned about this. It's scary. As a mother who remembers what it was like when I had 3 kids on baby formula, it's scary when you don't know where that's coming from and you're worried about whether you can find it and whether your kids are going to be able to eat, and particularly for children who have allergies or need a particular kind of formula. It's important. There are several things. The Biden administration is working with Abbott. One of the reasons we are in this shortage is because Abbott had a closure because of safety concerns at its plant in Michigan. So we need to get them back up and operating, make sure that formula is safe. I know that the administration has talked to a number of big retailers about trying to make sure that we can do everything possible to expedite getting production on the shelves in retail stores. Here in New Hampshire, if you're in the WIC program, you should talk to your WIC connection person about any concerns that you may have, or call the Department of Health and Human Services WIC program if you're facing a serious concern about not being able to get formula.
All right, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, don't go anywhere just yet. We will be right back with more on the war in Ukraine and what the United States should do next.